Father, good morning. It has been a great experience that you have been with us for a long time. I understand that your journey was all along like a teacher, a guide, a felicitator, and of course supporting the whole system. Actually, we would like to have a great discussion with you regarding the whole possibilities of education in India, in particular in this district. Say, when you look at the whole education system, we know that the whole system has been developed based on certain pre-decided requirements of either the ruling set of people or the people who had the power and the abilities of control in their hand. So do you think that education system is really a democratized one and a student-centered education system is possible now at this moment in India, especially in South Canara?
In my view, education in India has been, in spite of all the democratic processes of India, moving in the period of the British to independent period, have been hierarchic, both in terms of opportunities and in terms of performance of most of the students, with very grand exceptions. One exception would be Ambedkar, as a glaring exception, and many exceptions of this type have taken place. The coastal belt, South Canara, North Canara, if we see properly from 1862 downwards till today, North Canara by and large has remained much more backward in terms of education than South Canara. More institutions have come here, and these institutions in the last 50 years have become much more market oriented, private and market oriented, based specifically in terms of the education of the, I would say, the competitively higher level castes and groups by capitation and other means, has completely moved towards specialization of a particular type in professions, but liberal education over a period of time has declined.
Yeah. Now, when you look at the whole education system, you find that there is an historical pulls and pushes for education. And when it comes to independent India, maybe including the British India, you would see that there was a move for universalization. Correct. So this universalization of education in the context of the development of the country and all other requirements, whether it is achieving its requirements or how you evaluate it.
Historically, in terms of India's development, we have a lot of problems there. For example, this Buddhism began to develop a medical system. Within the Brahminic system, there is a medical system, Ayurveda, and a number of other, say, whole of literacy, whole of dance, whole of singing. All these were part and parcel of common people's life. What we call Natu Vaidyan, dancers were Ganikas. Later on, when the temple came, they were Devadasis or Ranganayakis. Everything goes with the people. Those who were leading in the hierarchy as pure as opposed to the impure had a world of their own, except Buddhism and Jainism had openness because of mobility. This is the pattern in India. However, you go through the temples, you go to the building of Buddhist monasteries, Jain monasteries, all done, let's say, primarily in granite stone of various types. All that education without literacy was perfectly mathematical, perfectly architectural, and lasting. There is not a single temple or monument in India that has been built by these people, what we call Kayaka people, people of craft. That was a highly skilled world, admired till today, but illiterate. Their literacy and their measurement, their literacy, all that work continues till today, and you can admire every monument in India. It has never been shaken by an earthquake. By neglect, it has gone into, let's say, disuse, and the forest has developed around it, but not because of the deficiency in knowledge and skill of the craftspeople.
Now it's an interesting factor, Father. Say, when you say universalization, the universalization is being thought of in terms of only literacy.
Correct.
So what exactly I want to know is, don't you think that this inclusion and integration of all the skills people had, the different kind of abilities people had, should have been brought into an education system which should have been called universalization, where inclusion and integration should have been the part of it?
We failed there, totally failed. Even our so-called polytechnics were first literacy based and then a skill that was taught from outside, not from within the tradition. All the skills and practicals came from outside, not from the tradition. However, in the first years, in the beginning of the 20th century, these were all integrated. To give you an example, when I did my higher secondary school, I had engineering, I had composing and printing, I had electricity, becoming an electrician, I had blacksmithy, I had geometrical drawing, and then car repairs. All that built into 3 years of higher secondary education. 3 years after me, the entire edifice that was built around this, called engineering classes, was totally abolished, and only literacy with books were brought in. Even today, I bind my own books, and no bookbinder that is at the moment you find around knows the skill of this bookbinding by sections and with the glue and the kind of work that you do. My electrical work I do even now by myself. And printing has changed from composing and printing to something else, and some of the beautiful Kannada scripts were created around that time. All this skill has vanished.
So do you, sorry for interruption, do you, if at all you have to suggest an alternative or a kind of a different system of educational progression, starting from somewhere in the lower classes, what do you think are the important components of it going to be?
The most important thing I found out in the class today, this morning, or few classes month earlier, last year, students cannot remember anything of their family occupation more than 2 generations. Ask them to remember the grandfathers, grandmothers generation. You meet with a blank face and a 0 in terms of remembrance. How do you expect history to be studied? History becomes a contention from the textbook whether Padmavati was molested by a Muslim or Prithviraj Chauhan ran away with Padmini at the Swayamvar. All these become history, but one's own family doesn't become a history beyond 3 generations. All occupation that they had goes into ignorance, historical ignorance. Now, except for here, for example, in the campus setup, you've got the revival of the whole of Bayalata, but from the point of view of Yakshagana, the Nudisiri, the Birasat, and the number of elements that the students play, and then the sports, that becomes the cultural and remembered element of tradition. That is revived. Okay. The same thing in terms of occupational, professional issues is all lost in the rat race of teaching, rote memorizing, coaching, and scoring. 3 elements. Beyond that, there is no education.
So what you suggest is there should be more activity-based, the activities which are being inherited by the tradition of doing.
What has come from outside should be integrated in such a way. This was from what I saw in Germany. I was there 14 years, 6 years of study, and rest of it is teaching there. What I found is Germany integrated this in such a way that you created what is called the so-called small-scale industry, and that dominated German recovery after the Second World War faster than any other country. They had the engineering background, they had the educational background, they had the skill background by what is called the mobile master and student. Students went into 4, 5, 6 kind of masters, learned from them and became masters in their own turn. It's called the Meister, which was operative in India and Goa for a while called Mestri, under the word Mestri. Most of our Mestris who were building houses were made out of this tradition. Today's what's called real estate people are not made out of this. They are absolutely ignorant of what the Mestri was doing in terms of building houses and measurements and processes by which you could have done the work. The two have been completely separated. This is empty. When I was in Manipal in MIT, I was supposed to talk there for them as secretary organizing a program between Bremen in Germany and Manipal in 2003. They said we are going to develop a set of pair of chapels for diabetic people so that you could remove the kind of what you call neural kind of agitations in your legs. 2003 to 2019, they have not gone anything beyond what they suggested in 2003.
Okay. There is one contrast, Father. Say you could look at the macro systems where we say the big industries, big corporate houses, concentration of capital is going to be the goal. Whereas you are suggesting that there should be micro systems, say as Gandhi rightly suggested, micro systems, small systems where people have to be trained in to manage it, and those micro systems should make a gross difference. So in the education system, then these micro systems are to be more concentrated and strengthened rather than the current system of competitiveness in terms of literacy and memorizing.
Take learning of a language. A student is taught for about 10 to 11 years English, and at a master's degree level today, majority of the students cannot write a good, well-composed essay.
Yeah.
I corrected in the last 15 days for food and nutrition an exercise given in the classroom for half an hour of writing about a page and a half. There are more red marks than blue marks of what they wrote, both in terms of arranging the ideas sequentially, comparatively, organized in a way with language. Both of them are deficient at a master's degree level. You can imagine then what it would be at a PUC level. They are excellent in rote memorizing. Traditionally it was called Kanta Pata because the whole of Vedas was Kanta Pata, ritual Pata. And today it is Kannada Bai Pata. From the Kanta it has come to the Bai. That is the only difference. There is no difference in learning. Now, when I studied, I began English at a very, very late stage, and the Kannada was a dominant language with Tulu in the neighborhood, Konkani at home. All the three languages were flowing in the school. And the headmaster we had was an extraordinarily trained man under what is called the Gandhian one-year teacher's training. One-year teacher's training called the basic teacher's training. The best thing he taught us in the third standard was how to dispute and debate in the class. Third standard. Every boy and girl was required to debate over the topic that was given in the class. The second, he was a bunt, was called Mr. Hegde. Second one was one Jain. He was a Kannada teacher. His teaching of Kannada was most of it was taken from Ponna, Ranna, Janna, Pampa. Not in the Hale Kannada, but stories that he had converted into Hosa Kannada. Immediately, you had a link between 8th, 9th century Karnataka and modern Karnataka. There was a link created by him. He was also trained in the same teacher's training. And in no time, this teacher training was abolished, and today's 2-year teacher training was brought in. Again, bookish. Syllabus oriented, exam oriented. Now, I learned later on, say, English, French, German, every day 3 languages, 2 hours each. Last 20 years, I have taught in Mangalore English for IELTS, for TOEFL, German, French, about 10 to 15 students taking 2 languages on a single day, morning English, afternoon French, All of them have passed. A total of about 8,000 students have trained in the last 20 years. All of them are in Germany, France, USA, Australia, and elsewhere. All what they needed to do was they had a very good communication language. How long did it take? 3 to 5 months.
Okay, so that what you mean to say is these things, the language, expression, are need to be based on the experience rather than based on the mere repetition.
Right. More than that, we have to understand today language comes to a child in interaction with mother and caregiver. Nobody teaches the child a language. Mother, through what is called today technically mother is, speaks to the child in softer sounds. To give you an example, double lip sounds, throat sounds, tongue sounds and nasal sounds come easily to the child. Therefore, you do repetition of a sound, papa, baba, mama, all these sounds which are family names for parents and brothers, sisters and so on. They are all based on the capacity of the child to suck double lip. Most of the sounds come from there and nasal. Now, when this knowledge is missing and you go in for dental sounds, a child doesn't have teeth. How can you produce dental sounds? You can't. Mother knows by instinct there is no dental sound required for the child. Immediately the inner, say, evolved movement, genetic understanding would be to give the child accordingly. And this interaction creates in child what is called a genetic base of competency. Competence, this one Noam Chomsky would say, for a universal grammar which is present in the human species, and then the child builds on this by the time it is 1.5 to 2 years. If it is in a neighborhood of a second language or a third language, the child shifts easily to these languages depending on the interaction that takes place with the second or the third language. So learning language at a level of listening and speaking is natural to human species. When you destroy that in the school from the kindergarten to first standard 1 by showing them the letter which is not associated with the sound that you speak, there is a discrepancy. Now there is so much of research gone on into this. This one researcher, Professor Stanislas Dehaene, has got a extraordinary lab in Collège de France in Paris. He shows that literacy letters are in our brain as a guest, but language as spoken and heard is there as a native genetic equipment. We don't make this distinction. We teach the children as if written language is language, what they speak is to be forgotten. This destroys the very creativity with which we want to start with kindergarten and standard 1 and upward. If I could teach 2 languages on the same day within a matter of 3 to 4 months at an adult level, you mean to say at a children's level it would be less difficult? No, it will be more easy. Once this happens, the content of knowledge which is in the mental makeup, by appropriating that knowledge with all our senses, especially our eyes, and creating the knowledge base, what we call the message, the knowledge, the pedagogy and the epistemology, the manner of knowing all these and integrating it with a little broader what's called ambience of occupational caste, occupation, expert occupation from the father to the son or the mother to the son and daughter, when it takes place and the language comes in there, literacy is only an additional supplement. We have made literacy as a dominant element.
There is one contrasting, one interesting thing that is emerging. Basically, say the modern pedagogy of education, what we say is, say we teach students based on components of competencies. Say for example, social skills, emotional skills, physical skills, and all those competencies. So there is a system of mapping. But basically, this theory has come from an understanding of psychological theories where how learning takes place. But you are suggesting another method because the child has an inherent ability of education, getting educated or learning, and apart from that, the traditional or occupational methods or systems in the family and the culture would make a better alternative than the current the psychological understanding of learning theories. So among these two factors, do you think the factor which you are speaking about, the traditional family systems, occupational based, the muscle based systems, rather than the theories of learning where we say all these components can be taught in a very particular way with the motivation, with the kind of what do you say, support systems or stimulation systems. So do you think compared to this system what we are following now, the system which you advocate is better?
Been shown by practically all the educationists, cognitive psychologists or neurocognitive psychologists, neurocognitive linguists, they have all shown that the brain, the way it receives information and then processes it and expresses it outward in a social way, and then there is an empathetic relationship or a social brain side to all human beings in the mirror images, so that the feelings of others are also feelings within us, and others feel pain, the same nerves pulsate within us as they pulsate within the other person. All these issues that you have learned in the last 30-40 years go into the making of the new pedagogy. They are not abstract. And then, for example, at present I have participated in a course of neurocognitive scientists, computational scientists, one of the extraordinary ones in the world, Dr. Terence Sosnowski, and an engineer lady, Barbara Oakley, together and with another 2 or 3, they have put together a course called Learning How to Learn. It is not teaching. And there are pedagogues who would say, invert your classroom and call it inverted classroom. The teacher is not a sage on the stage, but is a guide by the side. Immediately the model changes. Learning stands in the center. Children learn not only abstract knowledge but also skill, and the two of them are integrated. Teacher comes on the side as a guide, learns together with the child things he or she doesn't know, and then together they generate knowledge in such a way it becomes skillful. Okay. And that is a holistic, I call integrated approach to the growth of a child, experience of a child, and acquisition of skill of a child, both mental as well as external in terms of crafts and other skills that come to them.
So one interesting thing is the policies of education, since we started discussion from there, the policies of education after especially the independence, there are a lot of committees starting from Kothari Commission and the recent new education policy. Do you think a progression in the whole system, or do you think that the system have to be reviewed again?
Totally reviewed, for the simple reason what Radhakrishnan proposed as education policy in 1948 was a much broader one, and equally broad was by Kothari in 1967-68. But after that it has degenerated during the Rajiv Gandhi's period in 1986, when he opened out the whole policy, and it went on till 1992. And what is proposed now? In between, there were 2 or 3 very good UGC chairpersons who had proposed from their own background in science and other social sciences as chairpeople, different manner of organizing Indian education at a national level and state level and at a local level. But then these have not been really implemented. So that practically all the institutions, except those who are profit making as private and those who are government oriented with the reservation of categories, government categories, scheduled tribe, scheduled caste, backward class, other backward class, general class, all these kind of things. Some have profited of entering into this model of individual success of a limited type. The rest of them have been left there. And with the education that is available, and the kind of industry and the private enterprise that's going on in India, you find most of them unfit for the kind of job for which they are supposed to be prepared. So there is a discrepancy between the private enterprise and the education that comes into them. They would say we have to retrain them. One of the most important, let us say, examples for this is Infosys and the retraining of those who go in there. There is so much of so-called computer application, but those who have done computer application, I have found 10% of them cannot create on their own a website.
So now, instead of the classification that you have, like societal criteria-based classification, like Cs, SCs, females, males, or upper caste, backward caste, in the education system, there should be a classification based on individual skills of a student.
That is correct. But then if we take the whole background of India in terms of occupational specialities, for example, a carpenter, the knowledge of the carpenter as a traditional occupational expert, craftsman, was such in terms of aesthetics of what he does, and in terms of the quality of the wood that he uses, the kind of wood he says is long-lasting, not long-lasting, whether it is mature, not mature, all that kind of knowledge. Today, after the 10th standard or polytechnic, a student doesn't acquire. Instead of that, the consumer market has become, let's say, IKEA centered or ready-made centered, and the ready-made, the same carpenter has gone there, has become an employee, and to the next generation, the knowledge that he and his father represented is lost. Now, suppose there was literacy to this carpenter and his son, literacy added to the skill, they would have 5 or 10 of them would have come together and created a company. They could have become as big as IKEA. See, this enterprise has been lost. Instead of those who have money and banking are dominating over the kind of market, that consumer market that will come into India.
Okay, so that's what I'm telling. In the whole policy, instead of catering universal education to everybody in a uniform way, there should be specializations and skill-based bifurcation or kind of classification of the students at each level, and they should be trained or educated from that perspective than the universalization of literacy. That is what you mean?
Universalization of literacy would be important, but not as writing for its own sake and then being translated into skills and so on. They should go, because there is a skill in the family base practically in all of them, except the higher caste, those who have got an abstract writing and knowledge base, which is not useful in terms of craft and daily living. It will be more or less ritualistic, symbolic, religious. If you remove that kind of world, the whole everyday world, India was standing so high with all its production. And then when the money system came, let us say Indira Gandhi, for her own sake, with the kind of struggle that was going on in Congress, nationalized the banks. Immediately, by nationalization, credit was available for everybody at a lower level with differential interest rate, DIR. For example, I immediately got more than about 500 women, those who were doing embroidery and tailoring for others. They had no machine of their own. All what they needed was a capital of 2,000 rupees to buy a Singer machine or a Usha machine. The moment you could get that money with the differential interest rate, more than 500 women in Mangalore got that machine, paid the interest and the capital in a matter of 2 years, and the machine was theirs, they were owners, and the skill was theirs. All their children today are educated and abroad.
Okay.
Now, why did it happen? Because the hands of the women were strengthened just with a little capital, which is circulating among themselves. This is the principle I found around that time, that Muhammad Yunus had utilized for Bangladesh to create the what's called the Grameen Bank, with predominantly woman-centered investment, and it has become exploded today to get a Nobel Prize for both the group, him as well as his team. Now, when a thing of this nature happens, then we will have reservation is useful because people are in socio-cultural hierarchy with exclusion. That has to be abolished. Because for that we require not a religious base, but we require an evolutionary biological base of humanity. And when we recover that base of humanity, that we are all equal, our faces tell us that we have no difference between us except of genetic difference of the population. Once we are prepared to accept that, then what happens is all these hierarchies break down. Education becomes, according to your skills, open. Caste occupational education will break down because there was a hierarchy. When the hierarchy breaks, occupational openness comes in. Anybody can do any occupation. I found this in Germany with my classmates in 1979. Girls who had done college had come to high school, as they call it, Hochschule. They wanted to become beauticians in the parlor, hair cutting. Not only beauticians, hair cutting and so on, both men and women. As soon as they finished their basic education with the skills, they went to a chemist and a biologist and a number of other people to understand the nature of hair, its growth, its chemical composition, the keratin that is there. All that study was given them. Immediately sent to a salon under a master to do the actual hair cutting and the kind of massage that was required for the head. Within 5 years, they became the masters in the salon or started a business of their own. Independent living. Literacy built into your long-term life cycle of occupation.
Now, given this situation, say we cannot correct the whole system, but if at all, say we are being teachers and being students, we are in between somewhere, say in the college level. What are the possible corrections for the teachers, and what are the possibilities for the students to get rid of all those negative or kind of pedagogical mistakes that we have made?
Most important in my view is that every teacher who considers herself and himself as a teacher has to go beyond the narrow syllabus-oriented, exam-oriented fixation of their education, where they reproduce the Indian two-bullock cart of last 5,000 years in education today. It has slipped away from the bullock to the education. Same cart, same bulls, same rules, everything, no change whatsoever once it was put into place. We are more or less going in that direction. Suppose there is a integrated education of multidiscipline, which for example in USA, Germany and so on, I have found interdiscipline from the very beginning. The moment you enter what is called higher education, graduate education, you open out. It is the teacher who is keeper of the expertise, not syllabus. The teacher who she or he, when they say, I am going to teach this topic, students go to the teacher, register himself or herself, and go into another teacher and a third teacher. Together, they will have a major and a minor subject, and then they put it together at the end of 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, depending on whether you want a certificate or you want a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a PhD. They put together their certificates, and then they are already from the very beginning multidisciplinary.
So you would like to say that teachers need to be multifaceted and multidisciplinary oriented.
Have certain expertise of their own, not assigned to them, but integrated as expertise.
And from the student. So it was a wonderful experience and dialogue with you. I believe that the new thoughts would come into the whole education system. Thank you for that.
Thank you.